If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK. This is Bruce McGuire.
And JR.
JR is making his triumphant return. Where have you been? Like, I've been contacting your secretary, like, on and off almost every day for, like, our ongoing series. She just keeps saying you're unavailable. Like, were you on, like, some kind of top secret mission, like, out of the country? Like, this has been the longest time you've been unreachable.
Bruce, I'm not, like, really at liberty to discuss, like, what I was doing. It was work-related, but, you know, I'm back in the flow of things. So it's glad to be back. I'm glad you're having me back. I apologize for my long absence without any explanation whatsoever, but, you know.
I mean, I wasn't that surprised. It's like, do some of these clandestine operations, do they last months, or is it usually, like, what's the average clandestine operation length where you're
I never use the word clandestine.
Hypothetically, if you were on a clandestine operation, or if a hypothetical agent was on a hypothetical clandestine operation, hypothetically, how long do those usually last where you're off grid?
Well, I mean, it depends on, you know, the scope of the mission. You know, the term clandestine is actually very broad. I mean, believe it or not, and, like, again, I never used the word clandestine, but just defining it for the listening public, you know, in terms of a government definition, a lot of clandestine, quote-unquote, missions are actually quite brief in nature. You know, people that go deep undercover for years and it, you know, is like some sort of, like, Hollywood film, like, you know, those things do happen. But more often than not, people, like, go in, they're in and out, and, you know, they get the fuck out of Dodge. So,
All right,
yeah,
well,
like,
once again, if you like the podcast, feel free to donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. If you like this podcast, hit the like button. Feel free to share it across social media platforms. Make sure to like our Facebook page. You could also check us out, Twitter, Reddit, Patreon. And if you do become a patron, you do get to request topics that we will cover. And you can request certain hosts as well. I know a lot of people are interested in what JR has to say, even though he won't clarify his exact work clearances or work detail. He does seem to know quite a few things about how the government operates. So, yeah, keep that in mind. All right, let's get down to it. You actually brought this topic up, and certain people actually feel that Joe Rogan has become some kind of a government shill, because he used to be hardcore into conspiracy. He was the moon hoax guy, and I know you don't really want to talk about that. You did say you would do our moon landing hoax series, which we do have upcoming. Hopefully, JR.
Yeah, I'll be a part of that, Bruce. I'll definitely, you know.
And you don't have to. You don't have to answer any questions about that right now. Just in the scope of Joe Rogan, he used to really, really go hardcore after the people who take. Like, people would say, "How do I know it's real? Oh, I saw it on TV." And he'd be like, "Oh, you're a genius. You saw it on TV. Do you watch Godzilla movies too?" That must be real because you saw it on TV. But anyway, he was utilizing logic, critical thinking, deductive reasoning in at least questioning the moon landing situation and NASA. And all of a sudden, it seemed like once he got really popular with his podcast, which now rakes in millions and millions of views on different platforms, and his complete refusal to really make any finite statements on anything relating hardcore conspiracies. He still mentions JFK, which, by the way, we have a really, really in-depth and comprehensive JFK podcast series coming up, which JR will join us for as well. I know he knows a few people involved that had some clearances regarding JFK, and we will be going over the documents that were released and JR's information on why certain other documents were not released. That was just a quick teaser. We're not going to go into it now. So Joe Rogan does mention JFK. He mentions Operation Northwoods. He mentions the Gulf of Tonkin. So he mentioned some of these known so-called conspiracies or operations that were not as advertised. But for some reason, when anybody brings up anything NASA related or anything flat Earth, it's like he immediately shuts down and goes into cognitive dissonance mode. And which is funny because he seems intelligent enough to call people out on their logical fallacies and cognitive dissonance on other topics, but hypocritically, he's even more extreme in pushing his dissonance and lack of knowledge and just appealing to authority nonstop. He appeals to authority, he appeals to popularity. He keeps saying, well, you're not a scientist. There's scientists on both sides of every issue. So, like, which one are you going to put your blind faith into? He doesn't seem to either realize that or he's a shill pushing an agenda. What are your thoughts on Joe Rogan, JR?
Well, first of all, I don't really understand, like, how he attained, like, the popularity that he currently has. In any measure. I don't really understand, like, I just don't understand. I mean, you know, that's one of those areas you would have to bring in some sort of, like, entertainment, like, personality to explain to me how he got to that level of fame.
Well, what I see, he seemed to have dipped his toes in a lot of different areas. So he was in the Fear Factor show, which, I mean, that was a top-rated show at its height. So he had a pretty big following from that, and then he's also a comedian. I've never quite found his type of comedy funny. He seems to.
Yeah,
He seems to just really constantly want to talk about like homosexuals for some reason, and like it just that's his like go to for some reason, and just constantly talk about butt related issues. Like I don't really know what his fixation with that is. It's a very strange fixation, but apparently a lot of people are into that fixation. Maybe that's a certain percentage of his popularity. And then the people that like he kind of has bro humor. I guess that'd be just. Would you describe it as that?
I guess like bro. It's like a bro slash butt fixation slash potty type humor that he has that I guess appeals to like a certain group of people. I don't really see.
Well, I mean,
that's what I don't understand.
Look at the masses. Look at herd mentality. The masses. What the masses find funny in pop culture. I mean, is he a good representation of that? I mean, he's kind of like a pseudo-intellectual where he kind of pretends to be a lot smarter than he is, but then he very wisely says that he's just an idiot and he doesn't really know anything. But then he like starts pushing agendas, and he also kind of flip-flops on issues because people call him out on it in his podcast. Like if you look at through the YouTube comments, I mean, there's quite a few astute listeners who kind of, oh, Joe Rogan's a liberal today. Oh, Joe Rogan's a Republican today. Since he has a Republican on, he's going to agree with him on a lot of stuff because, you know, or like, oh, Joe Rogan only calls out certain kind of people on their BS. But if he has like Neil deGrasse Tyson or someone on who just states fallacy after fallacy, he'll lap it all up and pretend he was never, you know, the moon hoax crusader, as he's been called. So he's very wishy-washy and he flip-flops a lot. But a lot of people in the world are like that, so maybe they identify with him in that respect. And then he's also a pseudo-intellectual, so he pretends to be a lot smarter than he is, which I think wins over a lot of people because people that aren't that logical or intellectual, they're going to buy into that and buy into Joe Rogan as an authority in many issues.
I think that, yeah, I mean, you know, and Bruce, I mean, like, you know, you can take my opinion with this with a grain of salt because, again, I'm, you know, just like a simple government employee and, like, I don't necessarily know anything about, like, the entertainment. I mean, just purely, like, you know, the whole entertainment machine, being a part of it as, like, you know, someone like him, you know, I'm kind of like, you know, the brownstone steps looking up. But if you had to ask my personal opinion, I think Joe Rogan, he reminds me of a fucking televangelist. Like, at the end of the day, they'll say whatever you want to hear to get you to call their phone number so they get your name and address, and they can send you their little prayer cloth, bead, biblical financial transfer, whatever they, like, you know, need to tell you to, you know, sow a seed, whatever it is. I kind of feel that he falls into that game. He seems to be like, you know, the chameleon type entertainment personality where, you know, on Fear Factor, those people were clearly desperate for money. They didn't necessarily have intelligence. They didn't necessarily think about what they were getting involved in. They heard the fucking price tag. They heard there was a fucking casting. And they were like, yeah, sure, I'll just, like, you know, like, submerge myself in pig blood and, like, you know, get paid. So, like, you know, he pandered to that particular audience at the time and, like, off of their misery, profited. Now we go to the whole moon landing thing. Well, Joe, I hate to really break it, didn't invent the moon landing hoax. It's a very complicated, very sophisticated conspiracy, and there's a lot of moving parts, like you said, with your up and coming podcast. Like we'll touch on each and every single part.
He used to go on and on about how convenient they lost thousands of reels of telemetry data. The only thing that could definitively prove that they went to the moon. He used to go on and on. The moon.
Yeah, but like I mean, Bruce, honestly, like let me just say this. First of all, my feeling of NASA, and like
yes, I do.
In the moon podcast, we're going to touch very heavily on my belief structure of NASA, but it can be taken both ways.
Can I ask
Look at the Hubble.
As a quick aside, can I ask you, have you ever worked for NASA in any capacity, or are you not allowed to answer that question due to some kind of classified NASA project?
I've never physically worked for the organization, but I've been to their installations, and I have received specific training in and out of like certain facilities, and I'm not going to get into that right now. But
okay.
like, yeah, I mean, like I've worked with alongside people
So you have a pretty good working knowledge of how they operate from within.
Of how the actual organization works, how their people act, like what their vending machines are stocked with. Like, yeah, I have a pretty decent understanding of that. Have I ever been have I ever received a paycheck from NASA? No, not in the name of NASA, but like I have been involved, with certain things that occurred on their property, and certain stuff like where they had specialists that were from there that were associated with what I was working with at the time. But regardless, what I started to say was it's twofold. Yeah, they could have lost thousands of hours of telemetry data, but it's twofold. I mean, like that's kind of a conspiracy in itself, right? Because they shot the Hubble telescope into space. It cost $4 billion. When they got stuck in thing in space, it was out of focus. I mean,
some people would say allegedly shot into space, and they would say that those photographs are CGI. Just saying, the flat earthers out there.
And that's part one of the conspiracy. Part two of the conspiracy is that they actually did, and even Congress, I forget the congressman's name, said we gave you $4.5 billion to build this. No one could lay it out in the field and make sure that it was in focus. I forget who that was. You can post it in the comments. I'll look up the guy later. But there's two sides to that. Yeah, one, Hubble telescope isn't even real. Part two of that is the Hubble telescope is real, but NASA made a really big fuck up. You have to understand, out of all the organizations that exist in the government, the one thing about NASA is that it's all hypothetical. They never guarantee anything. FBI, billions of dollars in financing. But they guarantee that they're going to hunt and kick in as many doors as they need to find their wanted people. Okay? $1 million in a briefcase because a kid is kidnapped. Done. Hour. They're the most efficient organization out of all the government organizations. Okay? NASA, give us a couple $1 billion and we'll see if we can do something with it. That's the difference. And whether or not you believe that they actually do, whether it's a hoax, whether it's a conspiracy, because they can't, that's one thing. But the fact is, no matter if it's a hoax or not, we give them billions of dollars, and they literally just say, well, we'll try to make it happen. So that's NASA. So, I mean, that's also a really big playing field for conspiracy theorists, right? Because it's not like the FBI where, yeah, we know this guy actually killed people and we're hunting him down, right? So, no one knows.
I don't think anybody can argue that point. But circling back to Joe Rogan and his popularity,
Well,
so he brought in that Fear Factor crowd. Then he's also a comedian with bro humor, which that's a large contingent of the population. And then he's also a UFC commentator, and that got really popular. So now he's bringing in three really, really popular crowds. And then he's also a stoner, a massive stoner who advocates marijuana. So now he's bringing in another massive crowd. And then he's also a conspiracy theorist, or he was, which had brought in some of our crowd, which he still retains. And I'm saying all of this as a Joe Rogan fan. I mean, I'm not going to say I'm not a hardcore fan because of his hypocrisy, his flip-flopping wishy-washy, and his illogicality, and his pseudo-intellectualism. But despite all of that, I think he still makes good points sometimes, and he's not afraid to call certain people out on their BS. Obviously, he is other people. But some people, so I think that's how he got popular. Some people think that he actually was catapulted into superstardom with his show, Joe Rogan Questions Everything, except for the most extreme conspiracies. They carefully avoid those, but because that doesn't match the narrative. But he some people think his family was threatened. So Alex Jones, I know you've mentioned him several times, but Alex Jones, who's actually been friends with Joe Rogan since I think the 90s. So they've known
surprise,
each other.
surprise. I mean, like, like birds of a feather.
Well,
isn't he selling isn't he selling oil that can cure all? I mean, televangelists, call this number and we'll send you the oil.
We've had this conversation several times, but in Alex Jones's defense, have you looked at reviews from Alex Jones haters who hate that everything about him, and they tried his products and they actually said they were legit, like they're actually high quality supplements? I have not tried.
Okay, but
I'm in your boat. I don't know if I would buy something from that man. No offense to Alex Jones, but sometimes and this is an understatement, but sometimes he appears a little bit unhinged. However, I'm not going to call him a liar. He might be honestly putting forth all the information that he believes is true. Some people think Alex Jones is a shill, but Alex Jones did say this about Joe Rogan. He said Joe Rogan was threatened, and they threatened his family to toe the line, and he's got big money sponsors. We're not going to go into who they are. We're not going to go into certain other aspects of former Nazis and people and political people that are involved in some very shady political deals, which allegedly financed Joe Rogan and his podcast. So Alex Jones has called all of that out. Whether there's truth to it or not, has Joe Rogan been bought off, or is he an active government shill? Those are the questions I have for you, JR. And I think some people would speculate you happen to have Joe Rogan's initials. Is that a conspiracy, JR?
No, that's just ironic. Fact. That kind of reminds me of Office Space, where the guy's name is Michael Bolton. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's no association there whatsoever. I can definitively say. Is he a government shill? That's an interesting. We've talked about this in other podcasts where the government has a lot of slush fund type organizations, like the National Science Foundation, and all these things where they finance shit. That's supposed to, college research projects and stuff, under the radar, where it's the United States military isn't, directly involved in financing your, graduate paper or whatever, because, but you don't care where the money's coming from, but it's being financed by the National Science Foundation. Well, ultimately the National Science Foundation, if the government asks, the Army asks, well, we need to see that paper, what are they going to say? No, because, they are the same, it's all the same people. So, yes, it's possible that he's being somehow funded through some sort of, third-party entity. I can't say for sure that he is, but, I find it difficult to believe on a certain level that, they would waste their time.
But how is it a waste of time? If he's one of the top, if not the top podcaster, if they need to control certain narratives, for example, the Flat Earthers believe that Joe Rogan is just a shill who shuts down. If you watch I don't know if you've seen his podcast with Eddie Bravo. Eddie Bravo, you know what's insane? So Eddie Bravo comes off as a complete insane lunatic, but if you just count logical fallacies, Joe Rogan is just extremely fallacious in how he dismisses everything Eddie Bravo says. And he's just Eddie Bravo, regardless of whether he's right or wrong about Flat Earth, he comes off looking so much more objective, scientific, logical, critical thinking. He's a deductive reasoner. And Joe Rogan is just comes off completely brainless in those exchanges where his cognitive dissonance is so extreme, and he can't be intellectually honest in that kind of debate, because he just immediately says, I can't talk about this. Oh, but you're not an expert. You don't know what it's supposed to look like. He always just appeals to all these fallacies in his defense. So some people think that that's a way to control the narrative, because so many millions of people listen to Joe Rogan's podcast. If Joe Rogan, who's a supposed conspiracy theorist, if he's kind of the term in the conspiracy world is called gatekeeper. So So the government, in this theory, the government, I'm sure you know what it is, but I'll just repeat it for some of the listeners who might not know what a gatekeeper is within the government conspiracy community. But a gatekeeper is someone who the government basically acknowledges there'll be a certain percentage of the population who's not going to believe the propaganda, most of the propaganda at face value. So they accept that a certain percentage of the citizenry is going to look into certain things. Now, they don't want them looking too deep because, of course, they want obedient taxpayers that are going to at least buy something. So they instill these controlled opposition gatekeepers, which basically propagate certain conspiracies while keeping the lid on the more extreme ones that they don't want touched at all. So the most sensitive conspiracies that they don't want anybody to look at, like for example, flat Earth, or because if that's true, I mean that's completely insane if that's true. Or some of these other conspiracies, maybe some of these shootings or whatnot, they don't want people going too deep. So they'll accept that they'll go a certain level deep, maybe UFOs, maybe JFK, maybe some other things, but they want people in place that government conspiracy theorists are going to trust. People like Joe Rogan, people like Alex Jones or David Icke. Some people think they're all controlled opposition shills. But they'll have these people stop. So they're gatekeepers. So they're going to stop at that final gate or a more sensitive gate that they don't want anybody going beyond. So there are these gatekeepers that everybody trusts, and if they kind of shut down certain extreme conspiracy theories, that's a way to control the narrative for the government. So some people believe, and you'd have to agree, Joe Rogan would make an excellent gatekeeper because he has a huge following, a huge audience, and certain conspiracy theorists really trust him because he does appear to be objective, logical, and open-minded about certain conspiracy theories, but not others. So if he shuts down others as being fake, then his following won't look into them and ever find out that they might be true.
I can agree with that. I will say that I think your flat Earth theory is a little thin with what you're trying to say, though, because you also have to understand that the government is not going to pump millions of dollars into something where it doesn't really affect them. Like again, like the government is very self-serving. So I mean, if we were talking about like, for example, Area 51, which is a big tourist trap. Specifically, if we were talking about like the Delta Quadrant of Area 51, which is where like there's certain like like that type of thing, like like if he started dropping stuff like that on a dime all the time, like he had people on there where like we would have problems with
sorry to interrupt, but I'm going to forget my question if I don't ask you. Sorry for these asides, but there's so many questions I have for you that we don't get to. Are you allowed to talk about Area 52?
I'm not allowed to talk about anything that has to do with Nevada, Bruce. But and again, like I'm not necessarily like I'm not even associated necessarily with that. I'm just not even gonna like go there and like like I'm not.
I know a
I'm not
lot of
gonna
our
touch that.
listeners want to know about Area 52.
Well, there's actually Area 51 through Area 55, but like like we're not. In fact, there's more areas than that as well. In fact, it's funny because Area 51 gets all the credit, but like there are a couple Area 40s that are interesting as well. But no, we're not going to go into that. Like like you laugh, but like
you can't blame me.
There are certain airspace maps over the years. Again, I'm not going to get into specifics, but like if you actually looked at them and if you actually saw like little points on a dot, like like what's there and like what's going on. Like you'd be more interested in a lot of other places other than Area 51, especially with your channel. Can
you mention any of them?
I'll think about it, and maybe in the next podcast we'll throw a couple bones. We'll throw a couple bones to the people. But by and large, no, I'm not going to mention it.
We'll appreciate any bones you can throw. But okay, go on.
Well, what I'm saying is that like if it had something to do with where there might be like a terrorist action, or like it could be where people take it to a serious level where like other authoritative government entities would want to monitor that particular area, then I can understand. Flat earthers, like, even though like I mean, and again, I'm not going to sit here and deny like every single thing that they've said. They make a lot of really basic points. I mean, you know, like I look at basic points like teaching a kid money, like a first grader money. If you look at, like, you know, teaching a first grader money, okay, it's a very basic concept. It's very easy to understand. It's very easy to accept. It's very easy to grasp. It's very real to the human mind. Now, try to teach a first grader Bitcoin. All of a sudden, it becomes this really convoluted thing because there's all these complicated moving parts, and it, like, doesn't really quite feel right, but it could be right. So it, like, could be a Ponzi scheme, but maybe it's not. But like,
hold on.
But
Now that you've mentioned Bitcoin, I have to ask this question. There was a conspiracy theory that in Bitcoin's rise, the government put a kibosh on that because it was getting out of control and they couldn't control and tax it properly. Did the government kind of control the spike of Bitcoin and tank it?
I can honestly say this, Bruce, and this is not classified. I believe that they honestly tried, and the reason why is because if you look at Bitcoin and the rise and the power and the control that it took over people's minds, the same could be applied to narcotics, and they did not do that with the advent of narcotics, and they lost that control. So that's a perfect example of where the government would spend billions of secret dollars to try to curtail it because they don't want it to destabilize their currency. They want to be able to, like, regulate it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I mean, you know, like, so yes, in that circumstance, without any hesitation, without, you know, like, any fear of my family's life by, like, disclosing secret, quote unquote, you know, yeah, absolutely. Like, they probably had bean counters running round the clock. They probably had a special IRS, like, you know, contingent squad that was, like, and there were probably a lot of doors kicked in, you know, and servers that were shut down that we don't even know about.
Yeah.
To actually, like, so I mean, to this day, I mean, like, you know, and because it wasn't publicized, like, you know, like, you're never going to know that. But yeah, absolutely. Like, that 100%. No question at all. The government is very self-serving. It serves itself. Even when you look at the federal government next to the state government, if you look at a map of every federal installation that exists in all 50 states, every federal installation has a physical superiority to any state installation that exists within the state that it operates. And that's done on purpose. That's done to prevent civil war, too. So, I mean, yes, the federal government is very self-serving, and you don't have to take my word for it. Any type of historian or any type of viewer, please pull up a map of military installations and look at the strategic positions that they, you know, have in every single state, and that includes their national parks. Because keep in mind, it's still federal land. So if they needed to send troops to their personal property, then they could.
Some people still think you're nothing but a janitor for the Park Service. Do you have anything to say to those listeners?
I might be. Let the people believe what they want. I really don't give a damn what people think of me, to be honest with you. Like, I really don't, like, I don't do the channel for, like, fame or anything. If I really cared about, you know, letting people know who I was and everything, I wouldn't be using my initials. So,
all right, so circling back to Joe Rogan, how likely, you think, I don't know, if you're picking a personality to use as a controlled opposition, gatekeeper, Joe Rogan seems to be a prime candidate. I mean, he's plugged into Hollywood. He's got all these connections. He's got a massive following in multiple different areas. He's got comedy and comedians. He's got the whole MMA crowd. He's got the whole stoner crowd. He's also into psychedelics and other drugs. He's got the whole fitness and nutrition crowd. I mean, he's got the pseudo-intellectuals, the conspiracy theorists, you know, he seems like a perfect candidate for controlled opposition.
Yes and no. You know, again, I would, and this harkens back to Project Blackbird, Project, you know, like a lot of, you know, MK Ultra, those types of things. The government has done that in the past, and it's been proven, it's been documented. I will say that one thing that I think that over time they learned was that having compartmented sects and having people that are controlled by, you know, many individuals and not just one was a lot safer and a lot easier for them to manage, as opposed to one person that panders to a large array of people because, you know, as it comes out with when you have an individual who's empowered by controlling that many groups and they know they're a shill, they have power over the government. And again, the government is self-serving. So now, you know, we've created our own problem where we have to negotiate with what we created, as opposed to having tiny control groups that have wranglers. So is it possible? Yes. But I find it, again, unlikely that they would waste their time dealing with somebody like that.
But would it really be a waste of time if they have that many millions of eyes and ears on a guy who they can say, you're allowed to talk about any conspiracies except these 10. These 10 are too sensitive. Do not dive into this. And other than that, and now you can still have, like, be so successful. You could have your Netflix specials. You could do all these things. And, yeah, everything's good. Just don't touch these 10. Fair's fair. You don't think that happened? I'm not saying he's an agent working directly for the government. I'm saying that they employed him as some kind of shill or gatekeeper where they just said, you're not allowed to talk about these 10 things. Everything else is on the table.
It's possible. I'm not going to say that it's not possible. But again, if you look at it logically, why would he need their money to operate what he's doing anyway?
Well, because
he's not running.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is it a similar situation to like Michael Jackson, Tupac, some of these like really, really big public figures with large followings that if let loose, if they start to go against the government and promote anti-government sentiment on a large scale, like you said, that goes against the government interests. Those people need to be controlled. They need to toe the line, at least in some respect. And if like and just can you chime in on what you think about Alex Jones and David Icke as well? Do you think they're controlled opposition gatekeepers?
I think of all the three people that you mentioned, David Icke is probably one of the most credible in terms of just being credible. He doesn't really seem to flip-flop his beliefs.
Yes, he is very. Yeah, he does seem very logical and with conviction. For all of his criticisms that he gets, I that's a good point. I don't know if they would want a guy that's that comes off that insane because he starts talking about reptilian aliens from other dimensions. Like when he talks about that with a straight face for 8 hours straight during his lectures. What was his longest one? Like 10, 12 hours? Like, I mean, you got to.
I don't know. I haven't seen every lecture.
What?
I haven't seen every lecture. I don't know 100%. I mean, I've seen several lectures.
Yeah,
I have to say he's very steadfast in his beliefs, whether or not his information is credible or whatever. I mean, look, according to the FBI, a person can be brainwashed within 72 hours under the right conditions. So, I mean, like, if you talk to somebody about something for 8 hours, and especially if it is bombastic or something like that, and, like, your audience is, like, clearly, like, the type of people that, like, may use, like, mind-altering substances and stuff like that. Like, it can become easy to manipulate a crowd. I'm not saying that what he's saying is fake or wrong. I'm just saying, like, but I will say that out of all three people, he's by far, in my opinion, the most credible in terms of he doesn't shift. Like, Joe Rogan, I consider him to be an entertainer.
He's the flakiest.
Panders.
Yes, he's the flakiest.
He panders to what's hot, what's going to make him money, what's the issue. Alex Jones panders to, like, and a lot of these guys, you also have to understand, like, David Icke is not like that either. Like, David Icke doesn't have, like, famous people like John Lear just, like, show up at their studio and, like, talk about stuff for hours. Like, David Icke is kind of like his own ship. He doesn't really, like, he's the guest. He's not the host. These people, like Alex Jones, Joe Rogan, like, they're more like hosts where they sit there and they give their, like, little 2 cents. But they're also banking on the star power that they're bringing in. I mean, like, Joe doesn't have, like, no-name people on his show anymore. So I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
you
a
know,
good
like,
point. That's a good point. It's a good point. Yeah, David Icke. So you think David Icke is the least likely to be the shill, but he also does say the most extreme. You know, coincidentally, he says the most extreme things out of the three of those guys. And also, just a quick point on David Icke. This is what I found compelling about
well, I'm
David
not
Icke.
saying he's the most. I never said he was the least likely to be the shill. I mean, a clash of ironicism. He would probably be the most likely to be the shill in the idea that his belief structure never seems to change. It seems to follow a very stringent alignment where it doesn't. It seems like it was read from a manual. It doesn't
So
seem to.
here's what I found the most interesting thing about David Icke. Let's say the average individual saw the evidence and put in the time that David Icke has put into his research. Which, by the way, have you read some of his books from the early 90s? He predicted this kind of 1984 state that we're living in right now, like a police state with high surveillance, the curtailing of the freedoms, uh, censorship, you know, putting the kibosh on free speech, which seems to be, you know, the trend of political correctness and all these things. He predicted this pretty. I mean, anybody that has followed David Icke or looks into David Icke now, his predictions were pretty scary.
Well, they are, and but I mean, you know, to play devil's advocate for a second, Bruce, and I don't want viewers to get upset because I don't believe in the loss of life, and especially in a federal government sense, you know, and just in, you know, like any kind of sense. But I mean, like if you look at Ted Kaczynski, his manifesto, he gave over 300 citations to his paper, which was exceptionally well written, and he explained almost the same things. He just didn't have reptilian aliens like written into his storyline, you know. But he spoke of the same type of doom. I think that there are people out there that were just that brilliant that saw where technology was and where it was going to be in 20 years, 30 years, and they were able to make that psychological prediction. I mean, David Icke is not a stupid man, and from what I understand, he went to Harvard. So,
Oh, I didn't even know that. Did he?
I know he's at least lectured there. I don't really actually know his educational background, but I know he's not a stupid man. If you listen to him, if you listen to what he
Yeah,
says, the way he breaks things down.
his understanding of physics is very impressive. He
Yeah, wait, let me look at. I was pretty sure he went to Harvard. I could be wrong. He was in the Royal Air Force. He was a squadron leader, which was much more interesting. Yeah, so I don't.
I knew he played soccer. I did not know he played goalkeeper. So he was basically a gatekeeper in soccer.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I'm
I
trying
mean,
to.
you know, like, but all I'm saying is that, you know, like anyone can preach their beliefs. Look, we did a couple of Jonestown episodes, like I said, like we'll probably do some more. Uh, look at Jim Jones. I mean, you know, he was very steadfast in his beliefs. They didn't. I mean, they did molt over time based on, you know, his own personal paranoia, but a lot of the core structure never changed. And you know, like there's reason to believe that he could have been a shill. So I mean, like, you know, like with people like Joe Rogan, I really look at them just as simply, you know, entertainment person. I mean, especially Alex Jones. You know, if he was really being financed by the government, if Alex Jones was really being financed by the government, and he was really a shill, then why would he need to sell like that type of merchandise, like oils and stuff to like heal? Why would he need to ask for like blast donations? Like, I don't really believe that,
Well,
like,
just to make, I
you
mean, you don't
know,
believe people are greedy, and I don't. Let's say he gets paid $1 million from the government to be a shill, or even 5 mil. He's not gonna. Wouldn't you want more if you could get more? But like, wouldn't you take advantage? I mean, isn't that every billionaire? They take advantage of their position to make even more money. That's just human nature, right? Greed, power. Like, I don't really think, unless I do agree, I don't think he's being paid billions by the government. I don't think he's the government's top guy or anything. I agree with you where it could be one of these weird slush fund type side projects for shills where they're not going to funnel billions of dollars into it, but they might throw a couple mil here and there And for someone like Alex Jones with a certain kind of lifestyle, he might want to make more. He might want to make a lot more money. So, but just to finish up with David Icke, what I found interesting, do you think if you study, he was also stationed in Saudi Arabia for a while. I don't know if people know that.
Yeah, I actually like to look up his military career because, like, just looking at, like, the specs, like, offhand, I mean, just from my knowledge of, like, the era that he worked, that's actually kind of interesting. He had a very interesting military career.
I mean, he definitely
Uh,
the locations that he was at and the time frames. He might have had some contact with the intelligence community, which would make him more likely to be a shill. To your point, and the fact that he's pretty smart. He's really smart as well.
yeah, I mean, like, just based on the fact that he was involved with the Royal Air Force and that he was a squadron leader, like, he had, and that's what I'm saying, is like he had interactions with intelligence. So that, to me, like, I didn't know any of this, to be honest with you. Like, I didn't even know that we were going to do this podcast today. And, you know, like, again, like, shills, I mean, they exist in many forms. Like, you know, again, to not do, like, beat it in repetitively, but the government is self-serving. Shills can come in many forms. There are CIA agents, and I'm not even joking. This is not really that classified. There are CIA agents that work for the Smithsonian. They just work for the Smithsonian Institution. That's their job.
What do they do? Cover up the existence of?
I'm not at liberty to discuss what they do, but I'm just saying that, like, there are people that, like, draw a paycheck from Smithsonian, but, like, they really work for the CIA. Like, you know, they have very specific reasons for why they do that, and there's very specific roles involved with that. But, like, that is a real thing. That's not bullshit. And if you did enough research, you can find that out for yourself. That's not really that classified. But, you know, a lot of it has to do with their quote-unquote CIA world books, shit like that. But, like, there are other very self-serving reasons why they do stuff like that. They come in contact with international scientists on a regular basis. Scientists that travel to very remote parts of countries that, you know, find these artifacts that may or may not be, like, pleasantly glad-handing the United States all the time.
I'm actually glad you brought that up, because just recently Bob Lazar was actually on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he mentioned something about the UFOs that he worked on at Area 51 or S4 at the base south of Area 51, that there was talk that they were found in archaeological digs. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know anything off that offhand. I will say that, and this is probably going to come off, it's going to probably sound like bullshit to a lot of people that listen to this. You know, in the end of the movie, Steven Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark, they show the Ark being boxed and being drawn into a gigantic warehouse where it's confidential and classified. You'd be amazed over how many artifacts our government holds in special facilities for various reasons. Whether or not, I'm not privy to all of them. I don't know what's there necessarily. But I've known enough. I know even people who were stationed in Antarctica, they came across, like, certain prehistoric-looking material, like, you know, like birds and stuff that, like, you know, they dug out of, like, the snow. Like, they're put in a container labeled classified, and it gets shipped to a warehouse somewhere. And, like, you never know, like, what happened. Like, you just did your job for the day, and you dug up wherever, and that was it. So, like, you know, there are a lot of things that happen like that. It actually, that is real. I mean, that's not.
You know, something I've discussed on the podcast a couple of times that was brought up. The Vatican. In the Vatican archives, which, I mean, I don't know how many extensive underground warehouses they have. Do they have UFOs, alien technology? Like, what do you know that's in there that you could talk about? Because that's not classified by the U.S. government. So, would you be able to mention things that you know that are there? Because technically,
I don't have any knowledge of the actual Vatican archives. I know that they've always made a lot of claims that they're quote unquote organizing their archives. I honestly don't have that information.
Do you know if anybody within the U.S. government is allowed? Like, how much cooperation is there between the Vatican and the top secret elements of the U.S. government? I mean, do people in the U.S. government know what's in the Vatican archives? Are there any agreements in place where they would actually know?
I don't know that information, actually, Bruce. I'll be honest with you. But I will say that the Vatican is considered its own freestanding state. So it has some sort of arrangement with the federal government. That I'm more than positive the federal government has pretty much arrangements with every freestanding government on, Earth. I mean, if we don't have an agreement with them, they're considered a hostile nation. The Vatican is not considered a hostile nation. Therefore, there's some sort of arrangement, and obviously those arrangements generally include the free flowing, share of information. Whether or not, there's technical blueprints of spacecraft in the Vatican archives, that's like asking me, in the ancient Egyptian libraries of, Alexandria or whatever, have they ever been uncovered and no one's saying anything? And
some people think that whatever remains from Atlantis or ancient civilizations that were in the Library of Alexandria, whatever lost technology or lost evidence, that whatever remained is now in the possession of the Vatican archive. I mean, you've probably heard that as well.
Yeah, I have, and it would make sense based on just biblical wars. I mean, I'm not the most religious scholar, but just looking at the Crusades and various times that libraries were started. I mean, one of the things that ancient civilizations used to do was burn down the library. That was the very first thing they did, but they never talk about what they took from the library before they burned it to the ground.
That's a good point. A good point.
So, I mean, we don't really know. I mean, that's kind of something that's lost to the bounds of history, unfortunately. We didn't have Twitter at that point where the librarian is saying, they took...
Lost to the common man, the peons, but what about the elites, the kings, the popes, the intelligence community? What do they know? Whoever has seen... I mean, the Vatican archive definitely has a hierarchy in terms of who has seen what when. So I'm sure there's obviously people in the world who know at least some of what is in the Vatican archive.
Well, one of the things that I think would be obvious would be the Holy Roman Empire. That's not the Holy Roman Empire, but the Vatican goes back very far. Before it was the Papal State.
Some people would say it is the continuation of the Holy Roman Empire. Did you?
Well, yeah, in essence, there is a certain essence that it is in reality. It could be debated by particulars in terms of certain things, but what I will say is that there are certain things where, for example, the Dead Sea Scrolls. I bet you if you searched long enough in the Papal Archive, you'd probably find some sort of treasure map somewhere where they were crossed off. Because, you have to understand that a lot of the stuff that's down there was written, by these people in their own time. And that time gets lost to history. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, as an example, they just were happened upon, but there could be a correlation where there's, for example, a map that several scrolls were.
Yeah, there probably is, just based on how much is out there. But to circle back to what I was saying about David Icke, here's the thing. If the average individual with at least average intelligence, average IQ, if they put in the time that David Icke did and approach it objectively, logically, and scientifically, would they also end up with the theory of reptilian aliens from another dimension? Just based on he's gone to Africa and sat down with shamans who know all these things about human consciousness and all these things. And I think David Icke was one of the first people that propagated the Archon theory. By the way, did you go to your Archon screening yet, JR?
No.
But David Icke popularized that term. I don't think he coined it, but I believe he popularized it just from the African shamans and all of his ancient research. But would the average person end up with the same theory as David Icke if they put in the time and approached it objectively? What do you think?
I think it's possible. I think that, one of the things that makes us human is that we come to our own conclusions, and they may or may not align with other people. So, I hate to sound almost like I'm ducking the question. I'm not. But there are people out there that are like Gump, who are just blithering, where, the world passes them by like they were Medal of Honor winners, and they were, they were involved in Woodstock, and they did all these beautiful things, and they don't even correlate with the fact that they were associated with these events. But then there are people like, David Icke, who, they take every little grain of salt and they put it under a microscope and they compare it to the next grain of salt. So, I mean, I think that there might be a median that you could draw. I don't know what that would be, because you would have to ask at least 100 people that question, honestly, Bruce, to get like a legitimate answer.
Okay, fair point. My next question, and I'm sure you saw this coming. What do you know about the reptilian aliens that may or may not have infiltrated all governments in the world? Is the Queen of England a reptilian shapeshifter? Is Obama a reptilian shapeshifter? Is Donald Trump a reptilian shapeshifter?
Well, I believe that the Democratic Party, if given the opportunity to speak on this podcast today, would state that Donald Trump would certainly be a reptilian shapeshifter. No, I don't know. I've in all my years, and I've been at all classifications in terms of all types of different projects. I've never heard anything like that, and maybe that's why people will look at me like I'm some sort of janitor somewhere, I don't have any first-hand information to give you on reptilians or anything like that.
So you haven't even heard any rumors or whispers within the class top secret echelons of government agencies that you have worked with?
I've heard very Joe Rogan-esque jokes regarding reptilians. And we'll leave it at that, Bruce.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So now, circling back to Joe Rogan. So you're doubtful that he's a paid-off shill. I don't know myself, because how would I know? I don't know. I'm just saying, if I were the U.S. government picking shills, I think I would pick Joe Rogan.
But, I mean, again, you have to, you would do that because you're not the government. You're picking that as someone because you think that they might make a good shill based on the fact that they should be, but they're not. He's not shrouded enough, in my opinion.
What do you think?
Most people that I know who have ever worked in like really top secret things, you would never believe in a million years that they actually worked for the federal government. They really play their game really well.
Okay,
I mean, if you went to your
so you're saying it's kind of it would be like a double bluff.
Well, let me give you an example. Let me just give you one example, okay? If, let's say, for example, the federal government wanted to infiltrate a dentist's office, you might say, hey, well, we'll hire the dentist as a shill because he's the number one guy, right? He's the guy in the business card. He's the guy that does the little commercials where they'll put you under anesthesia for any procedure. He's got the people of trust. But in my experience, personally, Bruce, they would hire the secretary because she's innocuous and she has access to all the records.
Oh, that's an interesting point. That's a very interesting. So are you saying someone like Jamie, his assistant, or someone like Brian Callen, who he has on a podcast,
would be more likely, in my personal opinion, like his handler, who does the nuts and bolts stuff behind the scenes, would be more likely, in my opinion, to be a shill than Joe himself.
And you don't think? Okay, I'm starting to see your point now. So you're saying Joe Rogan would be too obvious of a shill to have him be a shill, and you don't think they would double bluff because that would require the masses to be more intelligent to be able to see it as a double bluff. So you don't think they would go?
Well, it's double edged, Bruce, because you have to look at it this way. Like, for example, let's use Jamie as a name, okay? Because that's his assistant, right?
Yeah.
Well, Jamie isn't being paid 7 figures to be Joe, right?
Yeah.
She's being paid whatever Joe is willing to throw her. So the government comes in, they offer her another couple of bones, and they say, hey, during the Christmas party when Joe's good and sloshed, why don't you throw him a couple of these ideas and hand him his fucking index card?
Well, Jamie's also the one who edits the podcast and deletes comments on the YouTube. So I see
and has the power and has the power over the people that he, for example, call my editor and have him edit this, or call my wardrobe and have him edit this. So she has a lot more control than even Joe does over Joe's podcast. Joe is simply just the face man. But, if you really want to get involved into the inner workings.
I see your point. They've also no longer really do it live. They've had some obvious edits, and I think when Eddie Bravo was on the last time, they deleted a huge section where they were talking about something they didn't want to talk about. I see your point. I see your point, JR. I think some people might agree with you on Joe Rogan being too obvious, because he is too obvious, which is a good point. But they might still do it, because it does seem like with most government propaganda, like so many people just brainlessly accept an official story. Not that it's not true. And because always to clarify, I never say something is true or not true. The official government story might be true in many cases, but to just take on blind faith that it's true, I'm not saying to believe that it's not true either. I'm saying a truly objective, scientific, logical position is not to accept the positive or the negative on blind faith. On faith.
Well,
So,
let me throw you another. Let me just throw you another quick scenario, Bruce. Let's say that Jamie has a friend Bennett who, her job is, she's an information gal, and she's like semi hot, but she's doesn't fly that way with men, but Jamie has been Joe's loyal servant for like a couple of years, and she's being paid by the government. Well, suddenly Bennett comes in. Her job is to throw Joe bones of what's currently hot on the market. So, Bennett all of a sudden starts throwing, real hot topics to Joe, and, they're specific to what the government wants.
Yeah,
so now we have two
I see
shills.
your point. Yes, I see your point. Very insightful. It makes sense. Just one more point.
Like, the best kind of con, Bruce, I guess, let me just, you see my point, but let me just finish off what I'm saying here. The best type of cover is if you're able to dupe your cover. That's what I think the Fed has, that's why we have intelligence organizations, because that's really what they do. There's a level of insulation that exists that, it can be turbined on various different levels, but, to go to the source, to go to the keg and tap it, that's not their style, in my opinion. Of all the years I worked for them, I was in the military. I went into a professional public career.
Okay, I definitely see your point, but you don't think they would threaten so not to ensnare someone as a shill, but do you think they would threaten someone or their family to just not talk about something? So they wouldn't necessarily be paid as a shill or employed as a shill, but they were just given a threatening gag order. You don't think they do that? I've seen plenty of evidence in cases of that.
Again, in my opinion, they would play both hands of the line. They would, the government likes to be the positive and the negative. They might threaten them through some sort of third party, but at the end of the day, they have witness protection waiting for them on the other side of the equal sign.
Okay.
So
do you think where do you think Alex Jones got his information when he said that Joe Rogan had been threatened and his family had been threatened to toe the line?
Well, anybody can be threatened, Bruce. I don't disclose certain things to you, and I don't give you my name because I feel that I could be threatened based on what I know. And I'm not Alex Jones. I'm just a commoner, and in scope of.
Alex Jones was referring to Joe Rogan being threatened. I don't remember what Alex Jones said about himself being threatened. That's a good point, though. Someone should ask him about that. But yes, just related to just Joe Rogan, do you think Alex Jones was lying or was given false information, or was Joe Rogan really threatened by the government to kind of calm it down with certain conspiracies?
It's possible that he was. Again, I think it would depend on a conspiracy to conspiracy basis. There are certain conspiracies where the government has physical, financial, and physical interests. Like when you start talking about the space program, there's a physical and financial interest. When you talk about flat Earth, unless you're able to attach it to a physical ship or a physical entity or a physical, something where they're vested, then no, I don't believe that. But if you're talking about
real quick on the flat Earth side of it, the flat Earthers maintain that flat Earth is the greatest conspiracy in history because, for example, if there's more land, if Antarctica encircles the flat Earth model and it goes on for infinity or however many thousands of miles, Admiral Byrd said it was bigger than North America or whatnot. That's so many resources. So it's in their best interest that nobody finds out about that. And if the government was intentionally lying about the shape of the Earth, then it destabilizes the entire planet and all governments and it would give all the power to the religious institutions because all the science would have failed. I mean, who's going to go to university to study physics when they don't even know the shape of the Earth? So it
Well,
kind
let
of
me throw you a bone, Bruce. I mean, because honestly, in my opinion, if you asked me what the largest conspiracy is on Earth, it would be the left-handed. And I personally will tell you today, I am left-handed. Whether or not, that has anything to do with my government, experience, whatever, I'm left-handed. But I will tell you that we are the largest unorganized minority in the world. If we were suddenly to rise up, we would affect every single government on Earth, and we could overturn every single government on Earth just based on our power, the amount of money we make, the actual, economics involved, the actual engineering.
yeah, but overthrow governments to what end? If there's infinite resources, if we don't if you don't even have the correct model of physics, if space isn't real, and I'm not saying any of this is true. Once again, I'm not taking anything on blind faith. I'm not going to believe the flat earthers just because they said something. I do find the model interesting, and if you're going to be logical and scientific and objective, you're not going to fall into the circular reasoning fallacy and just assume the popular heliocentric model is true, because if it's not true, then then you end up even farther from the truth. I take the objective side of I don't know. Whatever could be true. Both sides make interesting points. Both sides have holes in them. However, it seems
But
like
you also have to understand that both sides have very limited knowledge of the world that exists outside the etherical plane of planet Earth. Because even though there are a lot of people with a lot of opinions, and a lot of those opinions are based on mathematics and physics, and a lot of those opinions are not stupid opinions. There are people with PhDs, there are people with graduate degrees, there's people with a lot of different knowledge. The fact is that once you pass beyond the ionosphere, there's only a fistful of people that exist in this world
all right, but
that may or may not have that view,
yes, of course,
that have been there.
yes, of course. But just to finish the point, if there's some kind of definitive evidence of an intelligence that created a flat plane, and these so-called governments hoodwinked everybody into thinking it was a spinning ball, and then all the other conspiracies would rank underneath it, because once everybody is hoodwinked into a certain model of the universe that's not true, then that limits their power severely, because now you get into power structure. So I would say you are correct, obviously, about governments protecting their self-interest, but a flat earth conspiracy, that might threaten governments more than any other conspiracy, because all of a sudden all their power and authority would be vaporized overnight if somehow if the earth is flat and the truth got out. That would be one of the most destabilizing conspiracies ever. So it'd be their best interest if that's true, obviously. If it's not true and it's not a conspiracy, then it doesn't matter. They don't need Shills to control it. So I'm just saying, if it is true, it does seem like it would be a vested interest of governments to keep that covered up.
Yeah, but you also have to look at it from the other side of the coin, Bruce, and that's that the idea that the world was flat existed before the idea that the world was round. So therefore, if scientists discovered that the world was round, why wouldn't they let the rest of the world believe that it was actually flat? Because that would just prove your point.
That's the whole crux of the conspiracy. Was it ever discovered that it was round, or did Freemasons like Copernicus? Was that all a conspiracy plot? And I have to say, there's certain flat earthers out there that make a compelling case that only Freemasons and people supposedly part of the Illuminati, like devil worshipping Luciferians, like Isaac Newton self-admitted in their own diaries, these are the people that brought forth the modern models of heliocentrism. So Galileo, Copernicus, these people were all Freemasons and people that were into secret societies and conspiracies. So if this was a massive conspiracy plot that's thousands of years old or hundreds of years old, and it's just being executed. If that's what it is, I'm not saying it is, but if it's what it is, it all kind of makes sense. So it wasn't a case of scientists honestly discovering that it was spherical and spinning. You see the point there? So, like, and a lot of the history books are written by the victors. So, how do we even know for sure either way? And that's my criticism of the flat earthers. Just because some of these heliocentrics and spinning globe
Well, wait.
models,
Let me stop you. Let me stop you right there for a second. History books are written on both sides of the line. If you were to read 1945 to 1953, books that were taught in school in Japan, they would vary very greatly from the history books that were taught in the United States.
Yes.
So
exactly. It's very difficult.
I believe that the winners are the ones that are considered historical. I don't necessarily believe when you say historical, that's a very jaded term in my opinion.
Yes, good point. There have been so on the flat earth side, there are other books and scientific research papers published on the earth being flat and motionless with experiments to back it up, but they didn't win. The relativity model won, which Run Z. Cow, a physicist, high standing physicist who has debunked all of relativity. So if relativity is not real and the history books were written by the relativists, then what do we have for real? But we don't know either way, which is why I don't promote flat earth, because just because some of those history books are written by the victors on relativity side, and even if relativity is false, that still doesn't prove the world is flat. So the flat earthers fallaciously ascribe the debunking of certain physicists and physics theories in science. Just because those aren't true, that doesn't make the earth flat. I'm just pointing out that it's impossible to truly, because of all the murkiness of history and the victors right now.
Well, I've been playing devil's advocate all along tonight, but let me give a nod to the flat earthers. Let me say that, a lot of these organizations, for example, they won. They won because organizations such as the National Science Foundation funded winning based on, and they were funded by physical government.
You think we're the only podcast that truly discuss flat Earth objectively without really diving into propaganda?
I have to say, I think that we play both sides of the coin. I'm not going to completely denounce those people. I mean, even people like Alex Jones, he's like, ha ha ha, I'm not going to waste my time with them. Well, the ironic part is that he's not going to waste his time with them because, again, I look at him as an entertainment shill, and I don't believe that he's associated with the government. I believe that he likes what sells. I don't think that flat Earth sells. I think flat Earth is something where, they're pandering a lost belief, but they believe it. And to the ones that actually do, I don't discredit them because they believe in what they're.
What do you think?
They have no reason to. A lot of these flat earthers have no reason to talk about this. I mean, they're not going to gain anything.
Yeah, no, they actually lose. They have a good point. They actually lose a lot because they're social outcasts. Like some of them, their families won't even talk to them since they've come out as flat earthers. I mean, they gain nothing and they lose everything. But you got to admire their convictions, and they do bring up very interesting logical points. So. Yeah, but not to turn this into a flat Earth thing, because this is almost turning into a Joe Rogan type podcast where they go into flat Earth randomly, and then all the fallacies start flowing from Joe Rogan. But we've kind of covered everything from Joe Rogan being a shill to not being a shill to other people associated with Joe Rogan possibly being a shill. So you don't believe Joe Rogan or Alex Jones are shills?
They don't fit the model, in my opinion. I mean,
some people would say Alex Jones is the perfect shill because he gets people all riled up about ABC, but then he won't touch XYZ.
I think that, again, these people might ultimately be, independently financed by shady, third-party slush fund accounts just to see where it'll go. But in terms of actually being labeled a shill, no. To me, a shill has a very specific definition. I don't believe that. I think that, they might be financed by certain aspects of the government because the government is always looking for, the new nod. And, if Alex Jones, I mean, for Y2K, he spoke about planes falling out of the sky. Well, if he had been right about it, I think that they would have been a hell of a lot more on board. So, yeah,
Well,
they
hold
might
on a
have pumped in
second.
a couple.
Whoa. Regarding the Y2K, and we do need to do another podcast just on Y2K because I do have another question for you, and we'll round out the podcast with this one. There is a conspiracy that Y2K actually did happen. There is a conspiracy with a fair amount of evidence that a lot did go wrong on Y2K, but it was all covered up. So obviously, massive planes did not fall out of the sky. Obviously, cities didn't burn overnight. But on the computer side, there was a lot of shadiness that was covered up. Do you know anything about that?
I do, actually, and I will say that I was a part of the government at that time, and I will say that from the federal side, there was an active movement involved in Y2K because it was something that was actually realized. I will say that 99.999% of everything that I saw was corrected. I mean, what people don't understand is, I mean, when you look at computer code, a lot of times, it's not like, again, I hate to reference Office Space again, but you don't go through millions of lines of code and change all these different hard-coded values to something. The government pays high-level programmers, and normally those particular things are considered variables. And even in the 90s, variables had more than 2 decimal places. So there was a massive migration from a double-digit year to a 4-digit year. I'll say that in my experience, from the people I talked to, there were people that were paid handsomely during that period of time and really cleaned up to change one value in an entire software that ran one submarine. And they did. They actually did. The government did go through and they did do an analysis of all the softwares that they had in movement at the time.
You're not going to give us anything juicy about how certain defense servers might have went down, certain data lost, certain alien conspiracy.
There were certain instances where certain time clocks were actually considered ineffective. I will say that a lot of that, believe it or not, had to do with the Microsoft system. And one of the things, and I know this for a fact, and this is one of the juicy things I can tell you that probably is not on any other podcast, is when the DoD actually has a special contract with Microsoft where they have their own version of Windows. I don't know if you know that or not.
I did not know that.
That was written into the contract, was that the time clock system. Like there were very specific parameters regarding the time clock because there were certain servers that were running on Y2K that they did not update effectively their double-digit to 4-digit time frame. And the DoD has a very specialized version of Microsoft, Windows. They also have other agreements with Apple. They have their own. The government is very heavily involved with Linux. I mean, the government. I mean, we should do a separate podcast on computer systems because, to be honest with you, like most of the government is run on Linux-based type stuff, but they do have a suite that is privately contracted by the DoD, and you and your viewers can actually do research on that. That's not classified. It's public information. They did contract a specialized version of Windows specifically for the Department of Defense. But I know for a fact, just based on the people I talked to, they were quacking about it. The government had it was like a good 4 or 5 pages just based around the time clock system for their privatized version of Windows.
Yeah, that is very, very interesting. We will have to do a dedicated episode on that. And since this is MindShock, I will say this. Have you heard the conspiracy that the world really did end during Y2K and we're all living in some kind of parallel universe and or simulation since the previous version crashed? This is all a simulation after the crash. and all of our reality and consciousness and experience, it's not real this time around. So it was real, then it crashed, and this is all just a continued software code that is just happens to still be running after the crash.
I mean, it's very possible, Bruce. I mean, that's way above my pay grade. But I will say that, I mean, like, if we're going to start talking about that, it reminds me of that guy from The Matrix where he starts talking about steak. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of the way I look at it. Like, I've had past couple of years, I've had really good years. So, I mean, if this is what steak tastes like, this is what steak tastes like. So, I mean, it's stimulation. So.
All right, there you have it. So thank you, JR, for joining us again. We hope you enjoyed another edition of MindShock. Actually, I forgot to ask you. So, given this whole podcast, are you a Joe Rogan fan? Because I'm still a fan, and I still listen to certain podcasts depending on who's on, and just Joe Rogan's idiosyncrasies. They don't bother me too much because I know about them. I know what to expect. I know about his fallaciousness and all that. What about you?
I will say that I'm not necessarily a fan. I find him entertaining. I look at, again, I don't want to upset your viewers who might actually like him and believe what he has. Like, I'm not trying to bash him. I mean, he's an entertainer. I mean, to me, he's more entertaining than fucking Deal or No Deal on any given day. So, I mean, like, yeah, I'll watch him. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have any objections. But do I take what on his channel as law or serious? No. So, but I mean, yeah. He's a very entertaining individual. I watched Fear Factor. I mean, even though, I felt sorry for those people because I understood they were desperate, and I mean, I still do. I mean, I kind of feel like he capitalized on their, but so I mean, I have some mixed feelings about him as an individual businessman, but
yeah, I think a lot of people share your sentiment, and given many comments online about his kind of deviations and all the idiosyncrasies. So yeah, once again, if you like our podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Questions, comments, theories, anything at all, leave them in the comments section. And if you like the podcast, hit the like button. Feel free to share it across social media platforms like our Facebook page. You can also check us out Reddit, Twitter, Patreon. And if you become a patron, you do get requests, and you can also request on which co-host you want to have address certain topics. I know Maxwell Powers is popular, but JR does have quite some government knowledge. He knows quite a lot about the inner workings of the government for someone who might just be a janitor for the park service. But
I might be a shill for the government, Bruce.
Are you a shill for the government?
I can't answer that, but I mean, I would fit the profile.
Oh man. All right. This is Bruce McGuire signing off.
This is JR tapping out.
We'll catch you guys next time.